Mr. Burnett, you were chopping at the bit to get started. Why don't you kick things off?
Just a few things that I wrote down regarding the force pull that is shown in the beginning of The Empire Strikes Back, and why wasn't something like that used in Star Wars on the Death Star? Well, Luke had been using the force for mere days in Star Wars. He wasn't even
that was Obi-Wan on the Millennium Falcon. Obi-Wan has been seen to leap in crazy lava pits and swing his lightsaber super quick. You know, he's done incredibly awesome stuff. He was there on the Millennium Falcon.
Well, we don't know where. We don't know if he was in striking distance. Maybe they kept him back so he wouldn't be discovered. He was the most important person on the ship.
Do you think it's a smart idea to have a Jedi Knight be the one being protected during combat?
Well, this wasn't the issue. This wasn't what you brought up. You brought up Luke Skywalker specifically in the force pull, and you used the force pull of the lightsaber in the Wampa Cave as your example. You didn't bring up Obi-Wan Kenobi. I'm addressing what you said about the force pull and Luke. And the thing is, Luke didn't know how to do a force pull, and by Empire Strikes Back, he did.
I'm not saying that Luke didn't know how to do a force pull. I'm saying that force pull wasn't a part of canon, and George made it up because it was cool for The Empire Strikes Back, which is great. It's fabulous.
I don't think he made it up at all. I think we hadn't seen any, hardly any of the Jedi's powers or any of the Force powers at all until we get to really Empire Strikes Back. That's it. I mean,
Mr. Burnett, let me ask you a question. Did George Lucas have the right to tweak, alter, disregard, and contradict his own source material? Particularly this point, I bring it up at this point because not a whole lot had been established about the Force. I don't know what kind of canon was established in A New Hope.
I imagine it was intentionally vague in order to probe people's imaginations. He wanted to keep it vague.
Well, I mean, it takes place in a few days. I mean, that's like asking a chemist everything he knows about chemistry and demonstrating it in a few days, a few minutes of time. I mean, the Force, I mean, how long does it take a samurai to learn how to wield a sword in all the different ways that he can wield a sword? I mean, we never sat down and no one went to Jedi school in these movies. You know, we saw the Jedi Academy or younglings being trained, but no one ever took us through the years it would take to become a Jedi. From the time you were a small child to the time you were until you could become a Padawan took years. So the idea that we're supposed to have seen every moment or everything that a Jedi could do in the space of a movie is absurd.
I guess the point is. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Mr.
Yeah, to my point is, you know, the Star Wars canon was always a work in progress from day one.
Yeah,
and that it had not completely been established. I think the majority of it had been laid down and established by the time Revenge of the Sith came out. So to say that, George violated his own canon with the Force pull in Empire Strikes Back just shows that, you know, George didn't even know that there was going to be six movies. He just made Star Wars. You know, he had an idea, he had a foundation. But in Empire Strikes Back, that was his green light to say, okay, I can now legitimately expand on this universe. And so, of course, there's going to be contradictions. Of course, there's going to be tweaking that has to be done. Of course,
I think a huge part. I think a huge part of the fact that we have so many contradictions is the fact that Darth Vader says in the first movie, the ability to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force. Right. It is definitively superpowers that you can willfully tap into at any time, as long as you know how to be spiritual mystical man but my point, later.
Right. My point is, who is the sole guardian of canon from episodes 1 through 6? I'm going to say that's George Lucas. And I think the main point here is that this is George Lucas's story, you know, and for people to, kind of question him, you know, yeah, he made mistakes. He contradicted himself. But over time, he was solidifying ultimately what his vision for the Force and for what the Star Wars universe would be. And I think our point here is that Disney had now come in and dismantled everything George had built to that point.
Well, I'd also like to point out that The Empire Strikes Back was written by Lawrence Kasdan mostly, and also Lee Brackett, based on a story by George Lucas. So that's fair. Even from The Empire Strikes Back, George Lucas allowed other people to write films. Even the prequel trilogy had other writers that he wrote with. So, I would say that in terms of canon violation, here's the thing. I mean, I'll give you an example from another franchise. In Star Trek, for instance, in the first season of Star Trek, we don't really know that there's a United Federation of Planets. You know that there's the United Earth Space Probe Agency. We learn about the Federation later. And I would say, well, that's because there was really no reason or no instance in the stories that were being told in the first season of Star Trek to maybe mention the Federation. It would be like everybody knows the White House is there, everybody knows the U.S. government is there, but they don't mention it every single conversation they have. So the idea that you're supposed to know all canon based on what you see in it, these movies are just a snippet. One of the great things about Star Wars is that there's a whole gigantic universe going about its business, and we're only seeing one small story in the entire Star Wars universe. So the idea that it was ever supposed to encompass everything you needed to know about anything in the Star Wars universe is sort of silly.
I'm not saying that. I'm definitely not saying that. Obviously, storytelling needs to be piecemeal. Obviously, you want to leave some element of surprise to the audience to engage with as they go forth on the story as you write it. I think a big problem here, like I was saying, the canon problems are bound to happen when you have too much power or too much potential power at your disposal. And it falls kind of similarly into the Dragon Ball Z problem. After Goku defeats, I don't know if anyone here on this panel understands this reference or not, but after Goku defeats Frieza, the strongest being in the universe, the saga still continues, and there's always a stronger being in the universe and next strongest being in the universe. It creates a lack of surprise, and it's like, okay, well, how powerful is Goku? How can he possibly have any challenge he's not going to overcome? I think the same thing goes for the Force. Eventually, you're going to run into a problem where if you can just collapse a planet with your fist, your characters are too powerful to the point where they can't have a challenge, and you're going to start having logical problems when you have a Deus Ex Machina, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. The Force kind of
I have a
acts as a
question
Deus Ex
for
Machina.
Mr. Burnett.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Burnett, I really admire your extensive knowledge about all things Star Wars and Star Trek. I've been a subscriber for your channel for probably 3 years. I have to ask you.
Wait, I'm sorry. I thank you for that, but does that mean that you should be disqualified from participating?
Well, if we're going to go head to head, I don't think so.
Okay.
Well,
I think that's called sucking up, Robert.
Everyone in the audience should subscribe to Robert Meyer Burnett's YouTube channel if you have not
And
already. If you like long form discussion. Anyway, Mr. Burnett, have you ever read
I really want
to
one
the
of
Empire?
Oh, yes, Timothy Zahn trilogy.
Yes. Have you noticed in Heir to the Empire, which fans will speak at length, they get really excited about Heir to the Empire. I know that you might have noticed this. Have you noticed similarities in certain characters in Heir to the Empire that reflect almost derivative characters from the original Marvel comic book run of the 70s? Did you ever notice anything like that?
Absolutely. I think, as a matter of fact, look, I'm still waiting for the Hoojibs to show up in the Star Wars universe because
I have a cassette tape. I have a cassette tape of the Hoojibs. We can play that later.
And Jackson, I'm waiting for Jackson. I mean, you can get a Star Wars black figure now of Jackson. So, no, I think that there was even the Kyber crystals were originally introduced in Splinter of the Mind's Eye.
That was my next question.
Yeah. And so, Splinter of the Mind's Eye was something that was going to be made if Star Wars didn't make a lot of money. They could do a sequel on the cheap. That was the origins of that story. George Lucas did write drafts of Empire, but that's why, based on the story if you were in a Writers Guild strike now, they would have gone to arbitration, and Lee Brackett and mostly Lawrence Kasdan would have been, I think, prevailed as the writers of the film. But yes, I think that there was a lot of Star Wars material that people drew from the Han Solo trilogy that Brian Daley wrote, like Han Solo at Star's End, and the Lando Calrissian books, Lando Calrissian and the Flame Wind of Ocean, or Lando Calrissian and the let's say I can't remember any of the other titles, but those books. Lando Calrissian and the Mind Harp of Sharu. There was another one. But yes, I think
you're a perfect person, though, to kind of rebut the rebuttal, if I may. Have you ever heard of the character Dash Rendar?
Yes, Dash Rendar was the star of Shadows of the Empire.
Total badass.
Are you familiar with the vehicle that Dash Rendar flies?
Yes, it was a Carillion derivation.
Substantially less
like?
cool Millennium
Does it look like something that we're familiar with in the Star Wars universe?
It has a Millennium Falcon quality to it, I would say.
So you would agree in a sense that there are beloved characters that a hardcore demographic of fans really love. But when you take a look back, they might be slight derivatives. For example, Dash Rendar looks a lot like Han Solo, except he's from a wealthy family.
Right.
So I just like your impression here.
Well, no, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
But if you're working in there are certain archetypes in any story, and I would say that in Star Wars, bounty hunters, smugglers, droids, that's part of the universe. I mean, just like truck drivers, military veterans of foreign wars, and people like that, or construction workers, are ubiquitous in our culture. So I would say that there's probably a lot more smugglers out there in the universe, especially when there's an empire that commerce would have to get done. And what better way than smugglers? I mean, Han Solo, there's more than even one job, but there's more than one Hutt out there running criminal empires. So they would need smugglers would be, I think, a very great way to make money in the Star Wars universe, make wealth, so that it doesn't surprise me. And souped up Carillion freighters, just like people who like American muscle cars turn to things like Mustangs or Cougars or whatever they wanted to turn into cars. So there's certain shipyards that would make the Kuat shipyards are probably something that would manufacture a lot of these things.
I just want to add that I read the entire Nancy Drew Star Wars series, and I only mention that because I'm jealous of everyone's knowledge.
I am but a humble defense witness, but I would be remiss to not mention that we are seeing this continued pattern, this cycle, in that we have multiple sources now reporting that Heir to the Empire will be returning in name only, that potentially is the next name of Dave Filoni's movie that will be the culmination of the Mandoverse. And so that will be something that returns, yet is retrofitted now to fit Filoni's vision for what that should be, if that is indeed the real title of that movie.
And that won't cause confusion at all. Mr. Rubio, let me repeat this comment here. The Force is female. The quote daughter from the Mortis trilogy was the only one of the Trinity to survive in the form of an owl. The episodes were supervised by George Lucas. So, canon. Deal, says Kevin Rubio. Kevin Rubio may turn up in this trial, later in this trial. We have some shocking guests that will be appearing in future editions of Critics Court. And Kevin, I've spoken to Kevin, and he will be appearing on a future episode, as well as people I'm sure that the jury will both love and revile. It's going to get interesting.
Chris,
Thank you, Kevin.
I want to point out with that, the Force is female. I'm a staunch supporter of Kathleen Kennedy. Literally, she is one of the most successful producers in Hollywood. She's worked with some of the greatest filmmakers in Hollywood, and her abilities are, as all great producers do, they facilitate what the directors need to achieve their vision. And I would say that Kathleen Kennedy, beginning a full producer credit on E.T., Spielberg has said she's one of the best producers he ever worked with. Great producers are there to provide what a director needs. Sometimes, depending, they can offer creative input and all that, but great producers work in tandem with people. And that said, when she put on that shirt at her daughter's event that said the Force is female, I don't think she probably thought much of it, since that was what was happening at the school at the time. However, I would say that the character of Princess Leia in Star Wars was always a strong character from the very beginning. She's the first, other than R2 and 3PO, the first character we even see in Star Wars. We see her secret away the plans to the Death Star in R2-D2. We see her stand up to Lord Vader. We see her lie to to Tarkin and Vader on the Death Star after she's been imprisoned and tortured. When the rescue attempt is about to go south from getting her out of the prison block, she takes control and gets them into the garbage chute, and arguably is responsible for getting everybody to the Falcon and off the Death Star. And then she comes back and she presides over her forces attacking the Death Star. So from the very beginning, Star Wars had a very strong female presence in tandem with great male characters. Luke, Han, Luke, a farm boy, essentially two blue-collar guys, Luke, a farmer, pulling water out of a desert planet's air. And then you had Han Solo, who's a truck driver, and Ben Kenobi, a veteran of foreign wars. So they had to work in tandem together, the men and the women, giving everything that they needed to make something work. Whereas the new Star Wars trilogy from Disney put a woman front and center and constantly compromised the male characters. And that was something that the original Star Wars trilogy did not do.
Question for you, Mr. Burnett, from our jury. Joey Hamilton for 2 says, Mr. Burnett, is Manuel, Manny, both Hans canon?
Well, that's something only Kevin Rubio can speak to. For those of you who need to know what that is, when Mon Mothma says in Return of the Jedi, Manny Bothans died bringing us this information, many people think that Bothans were some kind of an alien race. What people didn't know was that Mon Mothma was referring to her lover, Manuel Bothans, and it was a man. And Kevin Rubio brought this to light in his Tag and Bink series that was done for Dark Horse and later republished by Marvel. So
Manuel was her pool boy,
and very possibly. But I would like to say that Manuel Bothans is indeed canon.
And please don't read into anything into the both ends name. I anyone that would do that has a perverse mind. In any case, let's continue. We're continuing with our open debate, and I'm going to highlight Mr. Blackwood here just for a moment so we can see some of the sketches that he's working on. But please continue, gentlemen.
Yeah, actually, I'd like to ask Mr. Burnett a question, but the question is, Mr. Knight's argument was that George Lucas basically killed Star Wars, that he delivered in 2012 to Disney a dead franchise. Do you believe that is true?
Not at all. I don't think. I think that while I am not a fan of necessarily the execution of his prequel trilogy, I think the story of the prequel trilogy about how democracy dies to be replaced by a jackbooted dictatorship is more relevant than ever. And I think that storyline will continue to be relevant as we move forward into the 2020s. And I think, in like all great science fiction, it was very prescient of the times we're living in now. So, if anything, because of George Lucas's his removal from the rest of the human race because he couldn't walk out of his house and go to Starbucks without getting mobbed, and maybe the subtle nuances of human behavior were lost upon him when he made the Star Wars prequel trilogy, I think the storyline that's being told, the actual tale of all three films, Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and the Revenge of the Sith, are very relevant and maybe the most Star Wars story ever told. It's just that it's the minutia, the nitty gritty, like the characters and dialogue that,
or like the plot of the entire first movie that could have been summed up in an act.
Perhaps. I mean, I'm a big fan of the machete order of the Star Wars movies, which eliminates Phantom Menace entirely.
Yeah.
Well, that was one of my questions to Mr. Chato we didn't get to, that there's this thing called the Phantom Edit, that you have hardcore fans who in 1999 were rabid for new Star Wars content. They were primed. They were waiting in line May 1999 Many of them walk out of the theater upset for several reasons. Jar Jar Binks is one. The young Anakin portrayal, that we have such long screen time with the young boy who people just didn't resonate with a lot of the audience or particular people. And so my question was, we have this popular thing called the Phantom Edit that Mr. Chato has seen. You, Mr. Burnett, you'd rather just not see episode 1 at all? Is that your preference?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily a preference, but as my esteemed colleague Become the Night pointed out, there's not a whole lot in that film. I mean, look, there's some great joys to be had, such as the duel with Darth Maul on
Fabulous.
Naboo. I really do enjoy that. Unfortunately, that we tragically lose Qui-Gon Jinn. I do think I really do like R2-D2 going out on the exterior of Queen Amidala's starship and saving the day, you know. And I enjoy a lot of that movie. I enjoy Brian Blessed as the leader of the Gungans, and I think that you know, there's some joy to be had there. But here's the thing: the one thing that George Lucas always thought he was making his movies for children, and I don't think he expected adults to embrace them. And I think if you've ever watched The Phantom Menace with a child and seen that film through a child's eyes, there is a lot of value in that movie for children. I saw Star Wars when I was 10 years old and took it very seriously. I don't know if I would have had the same response if I was 5 or 6 to Star Wars, the original. But I've seen young kids watch Star Wars The Phantom Menace for the first time, and there is wonder and awe in their eyes. And I think for that reason alone, The Phantom Menace has value.
It appears you are muted in some way. Ozark Matt.
Yeah. Matt, you're muted, man.
Matt, you're muted. Matt, we can't hear you.
I can attempt to decipher based on the hand movements.
Please, yeah.
It was a genius piece of questioning.
Anything from our expert witnesses, you know, just because you were a witness, both of you were witnesses for the defense, doesn't mean you're actually on the side of the defense. If Mr. Pro or Mr. Chato would like to speak of their own minds now that they're no longer witnesses for the defense, they may speak freely right now.
In fairness, Matt is now unmuted. So.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Mr. Matt, go right ahead.
Nope. Still.
No, you're still muted. You're still muted.
Muted.
Let's go to Mr. Chato and Mr. Pro if you'd like to express yourselves freely at this time.
From an executive point of view, I would say that nobody tries to make bad movies. I would say that the Phantom Edit is a good example of...
It appears that technical issues have beset us yet again.
Can't hear me?
No,
I can hear you.
Oh, that's too bad. And the Phantom Edit is perfect proof that George overextended his hand, and someone else came in and actually did a much better job of pulling together what were ostensibly very good pieces. He even hired, I mean, the young Luke was a wretched actor that he hired. So again, my point is that nothing is infallible. Nobody is infallible, as we all know. No one knows anything in Hollywood, and Disney did not purposely go out to destroy what Lucas has done. And I would say Mr. Knight there is correct, that he had already set the stage for some very bad pieces for the Disney's trilogy. And if Qui-Gon Jinn had not died, then Liam Neeson would maybe not have gone on to do all those crappy films.
And what I would say is that I would simply...
Yeah,
if we play it again, go for it.
Let me just ask Paul a question, but then...
Sure.
I guess my point or my issue here is, is it your impression that maybe Star Wars should have been taken out of the hands of George Lucas long ago? That he had been misguided in the way he had put the prequels out, and that for us to kind of solely place George Lucas as the arbiter of the Star Wars universe for so long was that wrong for the fans to have done?
I think he kind of pulled it all together in episode 3. But I would say that is probably a fairly good assessment. We all viewed those 3 movies with a lot of shock because we went, okay, what fell off? What wheels fell off this wagon here? Who was responsible for it? What happened to Star Wars?
If I can make a quick observation, correct me if I'm wrong. It seems as though George Lucas is a better producer than he is writer and director. Does that sound accurate?
Well, he certainly has the universe in his mind. Okay. And I think someone else needed to take that universe, copy it down into a script and make it more coherent. But and again, he was given so much power. He owned the franchise, and I think episode 1 is a grand example of hubris.
Yeah.
All right, so now to give my thoughts on this after the esteemed commentary by Mr. Chetto himself.
Thank you.
I would simply say that the Walt Disney Company was primed and ready to go as a vehicle for distributing this franchise when it was originally purchased. That's why so many people were so excited that this was occurring. It is correct that many thought that George Lucas had went so far astray that perhaps the Walt Disney Company would be a salvation for the franchise and bring it back to prominence. And that goodwill was granted by the market in terms of The Force Awakens. What happened afterwards, though, is that Star Wars, Lucasfilm, and the Walt Disney Company have been fully determined to not take our money. They apparently do not want our money. And I say that in the same way that I would say that if someone were to purchase the Batman franchise, then refuse to give you Batman, then clearly they just don't care about the cash. Lucasfilm could simply give us the original characters in the way that we wish to have them. Or they could choose to revere the things that George Lucas did well, which is what the fans revere. But they are determined not to do so. Instead, we get things that people don't want. Nobody wants the Rey movie, at least very few do. And when it comes to the Mandalorian and these other entities, we all wanted to see Baby Yoda being trained by Luke Skywalker, but nay, we received only a single episode in the Book of Boba Fett, an otherwise terrible and dreary version of the character Boba Fett from the original trilogy. It seems that Disney enjoys killing our favorite heroes in ways that are unbecoming of them. Han is killed as a deadbeat dad, Luke dies of Force constipation, and Leia, well, she just fades away. None of them get to see the victory. None of them go into the promised land. Disney needs to fix that if they ever wish for this franchise to be great once more. And if they do that, then the company still stands as the best chance to produce content in mass and distribute it all over the world. But I fear that they are not going to do that because I do not see evidence based on their actions in the past and their actions going forward that would indicate that they care about Star Wars. When it was brought up, the High Republic, while I was here today, I was reminded of just how revolting this whole thing is. And to conclude my thoughts on that, to give you some idea of just how poorly received the High Republic is, and by the way, that's where the Acolyte is going. Thank God that Kathleen Kennedy found the one person who could produce the Acolyte for us, none other than the personal assistant of Harvey Weinstein. No one else could do such a thing. But to give you some idea of just how poorly received the whole deal is, Barnes & Noble signed a contract with Lucasfilm. That contract placed the High Republic on their in-cap spaces inside their stores, the most coveted space in the retail section of the bookstore. However, they quickly found that the High Republic would not sell, and so they found a loophole that allowed them to put Timothy Zahn novels all over the in-cap space and lay the High Republic books on the floor. That is a great metaphor, a great symbolism for what the Walt Disney Company has done. Can it be redeemed? Yes. But direction would have to strongly change.
I'd like to point out that WDW Pro has become a hostile witness.
I was going to say, are you prosecution or defense here, brother?
Oh, Disney can still do this. Disney can still do this. But their time is running out.
I agree it is technically possible. I mean, they can still resurrect this. I think it's very possible.
That is correct.
Well, I think that the real problem with a company like Disney is their agenda is to create material that works over a number of different platforms. So, in terms of first and foremost being for children, obviously they want it to be four quadrant entertainment. But when you're dealing with a story that's essentially about war and rebellion, it's interesting to think. A lot of people think that Star Wars was this mirth-filled childhood fantasy, when in actuality, billions of people die in the first Star Wars movie. We watch many people get killed, both in the Battle of Yavin and also on the Battle of the Blockade Runner in the beginning. And it's fairly adult-minded when you walk into the cantina on Mos Eisley. Things like racism against droids are brought up. You have two alien sisters who look Luke over like a morsel. Who knows what they were going to do with him? You had Ponda Baba and Dr. Evazan ready to Kenobi cuts off the arm of is it Ponda Baba? Is it Ponda Baba? Cuts off his arm. And I mean, Star Wars is a violent, terrifying place. Sand people, there are slavers, there's all kinds of things. And Disney, since they have taken over the franchise, have done everything they can to soft pedal the more unsavory elements that wouldn't necessarily, I mean, they are not really interested in telling the kinds of stories that fans are interested in hearing, because they have to soft pedal the more unsavory elements of the Star Wars universe.
I think Disney could reverse the whole thing if Kathleen Kennedy would dress up in the Leia slave bikini.
You've gone too far, sir.
The hut slave bikini.
The hut slave bikini. If KK went if she dressed up in the slave bikini, then we'd know they're on the right track. That's all I'm saying.
Objection. 0 people want to see that. Nobody wants to see that.
I don't know. Have you seen the cover of the new Sports Illustrated?
Woo!
Yeah. I'd rather see Alan's photoshopped suction thing again.
Gentlemen, we're getting close to 2 hours in our court session. If we could move to any sort of final arguments or debates, specifically sticking to the fraudulent misuse of canon. We have a poll that is currently running in the chat. When we get to super chats, we will present the results of that poll. Excuse me for misspeaking there. Could be something of a troll. But any final arguments or things you would like to put forth before we end today's session in court? And it's open debate now. So final arguments.
I think we should give Kathleen Kennedy credit for not bringing the Ewoks back.
Yeah, okay. That's fair.
And I have an electric guitar too, so bite me.
Oh yeah.
And remember, Kathleen Kennedy was hired by George Lucas before the sale of Lucasfilm.
Correct.
True.
And also, I think that Kathleen Kennedy, one of the reasons I'm a staunch defender of her, is she had to deal first and foremost with Disney's corporate agenda as to what they expected from their acquisition. And so Kathleen Kennedy was never necessarily in a position where she could defend, and maybe she has tried to, but we don't know. And if you really look at what Kathleen Kennedy tried to do, when she first started out, she is a producer that is used to hiring visionary directors and supporting those directors. But when Lord and Miller took over Solo, she wasn't expecting them to go off book and spend so much time improvising. She wasn't used to that. And it was a painful, hard decision for her to replace Lord and Miller. But she did try and get some really interesting directors to come in. It just didn't work out the way she wanted to, but she did try. And I think a lot of what she was facing was an uphill battle with Disney corporate. And what
Let me take a tremendous risk and push back on that statement and see what you do with this. Let me get your thoughts. If that is true, if Kathleen Kennedy is so superb in what she does, then why was she so poor in her judgment as to the success of The Last Jedi and Rian Johnson, and seems to have granted him a trilogy before we had even seen the results of what the market would say about that movie that then had to be walked back over many, many years. What do you make of that?
Well, okay, that's a good question. I think Kathleen Kennedy would say that they made a great film. I think she would say even today they made a great film. Because I think that, unfortunately, here's what I think they made a film that was daring in certain respects, especially in terms of what they did with Luke. Remember, Rian Johnson didn't put Luke on Achito. That was something J.J. Abrams did. So Rian Johnson was saddled with the question, well, why would Luke wind up as a hermit on an island? He didn't create that scenario. He was presented with that scenario. And I think in having to do that, he did the best he could in terms of trying to come up. Now, did I buy it? Not necessarily. But I think at the end of that movie, Luke Skywalker as a Jedi does one of the most baller Jedi things ever, in that he defeats Kylo Ren and the Empire, or at least allows the Resistance to escape, and he's not even there. And that, in terms of
pretty cool.
In terms of using the Force for defense, that's a pretty strong way to go out. I think there's a lot of other problems that The Last Jedi has, but I think that they thought they made a good film, and again, they thought they made a good film from maybe a perspective of filmmaking. As a Star Wars movie, maybe not so much. But there's a lot of times that studio executives are out of touch with necessarily what a fan base wants.
How is it that Mark Hamill was able to identify during the production of it that we have a real problem here, but they were not?
Well, because, Mark Hamill is, but the thing is, here's the thing.
We just switched sides, man.
But actors, I know, right?
Oh, wait, Disney can still bring it back. Disney can still bring it back. Pro's going to wiggle it back.
The substance is more important than anything, honestly.
I mean, I would say that Luke Skywalker is the person who knows Luke Skywalker best is, in fact, Mark Hamill. And I personally, I am not a fan of Disney's trilogy at all. And I think that what they decided, talking about switching sides, what they decided to do was gross misconduct with a story that could have been. Here's the thing. If you go back to the extended universe, there's so much material now that they're picking and choosing, cherry picking what they think is the best stuff. They could have gone back, because the people that wrote a lot of those, especially the early novels and even the Dark Empire comic series, there was so much stuff in those comics that were thought more about than J.J. Abrams ever thought about these things, because the people that write tie-in fiction now spend way more time thinking about the universe and the characters than the people writing movies. And it's frustrating. And we're seeing it with Star Trek Strange New Worlds. They are cherry picking from great science fiction novels and Star Trek novels without accreditation of anyone. They're just taking these things when they should be giving story credit to Ursula K. Le Guin or Dorothy Fontana, and they are not.
Just to give you an idea of how bad The Last Jedi was and the damage that it did to the franchise. Although, let me say again, Disney could bring it back. If I were to ask each of you on this panel, in this courtroom at this time, which you would rather watch, The Last Jedi or The Garbage Pail Kids, I grant you that you'd have to give some real thought to it. So there you go.
So let me add something as a creative person, and I thought watching the Phantom Menace, the J.J. Abrams one, the
Force Awakens.
Force Awakens. Thank you. I can never remember the titles anymore.
You're good.
Aging. Is that watching that movie? I will guarantee you, J.J. Abrams started with the picture of Lena Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will, and he went, "Wow, that picture with the red banners and the white stormtroopers and the black background." I'm going, I'm writing a movie around that. That's why I'm resurrecting, the Empire out of convenience, because that is the picture I'm starting with, and then I'm going to flesh out the beginning, and I'm going to create an ending for it. But that was so out of place in the movie and so spectacular. I am absolutely certain that was the first thing on his mind, and that's what he built the movie around, because he's a shallow person.
Real quick. We did a poll in the chat of who do you think is winning this debate in the trial. We just ended the poll mere moments ago. Out of 660 votes, and I should note that there are 1,100 people watching right now, but only 660 people voted. So
That's
just
still
saying.
That's still a high sample.
That's a high sample. 74% believe that the prosecution made a better case. I'd
no
say
bias here.
That means that 26% think that the defense did a very good job, which I think, there's a lot of bias against the Disney Star Wars sequel film. So 26% is pretty good. We're going to be doing this poll every week just to see how people are doing. Any final how the prosecution defense is doing. So I definitely want to invite some of you back next week. We're going to be rotating in some new people. You're going to have some returning people as well. People have asked for Anna, that Star Wars girl, to return. Robert, I know you're a busy gentleman. Love to have you back at some point, depending on what we're discussing. You're all invited back on a future episode. Any final thoughts before I move to our final comments via the chat?
The last thought I would impart on people is, hey, don't forget we were pissed off at George for a long time, and we got really excited when Disney took it over, and we got pissed off again. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be pissed off. I'm just saying let's think about where this all started and have a bigger picture without rose-colored glasses of just how much crap has been thrown into this universe. And remember, it's science fantasy, so, chill maybe. It's possible.
Yeah.